It started as an ordinary high school track meet. Students from schools across North Texas gathered to compete, talk with friends, and spend the day doing what teenagers do. By the end of that morning, one student would be dead. A 17-year-old boy named Austin Metcalf would suffer a fatal stab wound after a confrontation under a team tent. His brother would desperately try to save him. Coaches would rush in. Students would scream for help. And in the middle of the chaos, a question would emerge that would divide a community, dominate headlines, and ultimately land in front of a jury. Was this murder or was it self-defense? More than a year later, 12 jurors would answer that question. But for Austin's family, the verdict could never change one fact. Austin Metcalf was never coming home. Tonight, we're walking through exactly what happened that day, what witnesses said, what prosecutors argued, what the defense argued, and how one confrontation at a track meet changed multiple families forever. Here's what we know about this case and how everything unfolded. This is Between Headlines TV. If you want more cases like this, make sure you're subscribed. And today, we're taking a detailed look at the death of Austin Metcalf and the trial of Karmelo Anthony. Let's begin. Before the headlines, before the trial, before social media turned this case into a national debate, Austin Metcalf was a teenager with plans for the future. Friends and family described him as hardworking, competitive, and driven. He was involved in athletics and attended Frisco Memorial High School. Most importantly, he was a son, a brother, and a twin. That twin bond would become one of the most heartbreaking parts of this story because Austin's brother, Hunter Metcalf, would witness the aftermath of what happened that morning. In victim impact statements delivered later in court, family members repeatedly returned to the same theme. Austin wasn't a headline. He wasn't a political talking point. He wasn't a viral social media debate. He was a real person whose absence left a permanent hole in the lives of the people who loved him. And on April 2nd, 2025, he woke up expecting to spend the day at a track meet. No one could have imagined what would happen next. The weather that morning wasn't ideal. Rain moved through the area, forcing students to seek shelter throughout the track facility. Athletes gathered under tents assigned to their schools. The atmosphere was what you'd expect at a high school event. Students talking, teams preparing, people waiting for events to begin. At some point that morning, Austin Metcalf noticed Karmelo Anthony sitting under Memorial High School's tent. Karmelo Anthony attended a different school. According to testimony presented during trial, Austin approached him and told him he needed to leave the tent. What happened next became the center of the entire case. Because while everyone agreed there was a confrontation, the prosecution and defense strongly disagreed on how that confrontation unfolded. And those differences would determine the outcome of the trial. To understand why this case became so heavily debated, you have to understand just how quickly everything happened. According to testimony presented at trial, the confrontation between Austin Metcalf and Karmelo Anthony lasted only moments. There was no long-running feud, no history between them, no weeks of threats leading up to that day. They were two teenagers from different schools who crossed paths under a tent at a track meet. And within minutes, one of them would be dead. According to witnesses, Austin approached Karmelo because he was sitting under Memorial High School's tent. Austin told him he needed to move. Witnesses testified that Karmelo initially remained where he was. Austin continued telling him he needed to leave. What happened next became one of the most contested portions of the trial. The prosecution argued that what followed was a disagreement that never justified deadly force. The defense argued that Karmelo felt threatened and believed he needed to protect himself. Witnesses described tension building between the two teenagers. The exchange became increasingly heated. At one point, according to testimony, Karmelo allegedly told Austin not to touch him. That statement would later become a major focus for the defense. Because the defense wanted jurors to see the confrontation through Karmelo's eyes, they argued that Karmelo was being confronted by someone he didn't know, someone who was angry, someone who was demanding that he leave, and someone who ultimately put his hands on him. But prosecutors viewed the same moment differently. They argued that even if Austin pushed Karmelo, the response that followed was completely disproportionate. And that brings us to the moment everything changed. According to testimony presented during trial, Austin pushed Karmelo. What happened next only took seconds. Witnesses testified that Karmelo reached into his backpack, then pulled out a knife. The prosecution argued that Karmelo escalated a schoolyard confrontation into a deadly encounter. Austin was unarmed. There was no evidence that Austin possessed a weapon. There was no evidence that Austin threatened Karmelo with anything other than the physical confrontation that had just occurred. Yet, within moments, Karmelo had a knife in his hand, and then Austin was stabbed. One wound, one strike, one decision that changed everything. The knife entered Austin's chest. At first, some people nearby didn't even realize how serious the injury was, but Austin knew. Witnesses testified that Austin immediately began saying words that would later echo throughout the courtroom. "I got stabbed." At first, there was confusion, then panic, then chaos, because everyone suddenly understood that this wasn't a fight anymore. This was a medical emergency, and Austin's condition was deteriorating rapidly. The seconds after the stabbing became some of the most heartbreaking testimony presented during the trial. Students began yelling for help. Coaches rushed toward the scene. Track meet officials attempted to respond, but perhaps the most devastating detail involved Austin's twin brother, Hunter. Hunter was nearby, and as the reality of what happened became clear, he found himself witnessing something no brother should ever have to experience. Austin collapsed. People rushed to him. Emergency aid was attempted. Witnesses described the frantic efforts to save his life, but the injury was catastrophic. The knife had struck a critical area of Austin's chest. Those around him were fighting against time, and time was winning. What had started as a disagreement under a tent had now become a fight to save a teenager's life. And while coaches and students desperately tried to keep Austin alive, Karmelo Anthony remained at the scene. What happened immediately after the stabbing would later become another major point of discussion during the trial, because prosecutors believe Karmelo's actions showed consciousness of guilt. The defense argued they showed something very different, and the jury would eventually have to decide which version they believed. Medical personnel did everything they could, but despite those efforts, Austin Metcalf died from the injury. He was 17 years old. One moment he was preparing for a track meet, the next his family was receiving the worst phone call imaginable. For Austin's parents, the future they had imagined for their son disappeared that morning. Graduation, college, a career, marriage, children, all of the milestones parents dream about are suddenly gone. And as news of Austin's death spread, shock quickly turned into grief throughout the Frisco community. Because many people knew Austin, many people knew the Metcalf family, and almost nobody could comprehend how quickly everything had happened. As emergency personnel worked to save Austin, law enforcement officers began securing the scene. Witnesses were separated, statements were collected. Investigators immediately recognized that this wasn't simply a school fight. A teenager was dead, and determining exactly what happened would require reconstructing the confrontation moment by moment. According to police reporting and later trial testimony, investigators quickly focused on Karmelo Anthony. Multiple witnesses had observed portions of the confrontation. Physical evidence was collected. Investigators worked to determine who initiated contact, who escalated the situation, and whether the use of deadly force was legally justified. One of the central questions from the very beginning was simple. Did Karmelo Anthony act in self-defense, or did he commit murder? Those two competing narratives would define everything that followed. Long before a jury ever heard this case, two very different versions of what happened began emerging. The prosecution's version was straightforward. They argued that Austin Metcalf was unarmed. They argued that the confrontation began over seating under a team tent. And they argued that whatever happened between the two teenagers did not justify pulling a knife and using deadly force. To prosecutors, this was not a difficult case. Austin was alive. A confrontation occurred. Karmelo pulled a knife. Austin died. They believed that sequence established a murder. The defense saw the case differently. From the beginning, defense attorneys focused on fear. They argued that Karmelo felt threatened. They argued that Austin physically confronted him. And they argued that in those brief seconds, Karmelo believed he needed to protect himself. The defense was not claiming Austin deserved to die. Instead, they argued that the law allows people to defend themselves when they reasonably believe they face danger. And if jurors believed Karmelo genuinely feared serious harm, they could find his actions justified. That distinction would become critically important because in a self-defense case, jurors are not simply deciding what happened, they are deciding whether the defendant's belief was legally reasonable under the circumstances. As months passed, the case attracted enormous attention. Part of that was because of Austin's age. Part of it was because of it happened at a school sporting event. And part of it was because people saw the case through very different lenses. Many looked at Austin and saw an unarmed teenager whose life ended during a brief argument. Others focused on the physical confrontation and whether Karmelo reasonably believed he was in danger. The debate extended far beyond Frisco. Social media amplified every development. Opinions hardened, people chose sides. But for the Metcalf family, none of that changed the reality they were living. Austin was gone. Every holiday would be different. Every birthday would be different. Every family gathering would include an empty chair. And while the public debated legal theories, the Metcalf family was preparing for a trial that would force them to relive the worst day of their lives. By the time the trial started, emotions were already running high. The courtroom was packed. Media attention was intense, and everyone understood what was at stake. For prosecutors, the goal was clear. Convince 12 jurors that Karmelo Anthony committed murder. For the defense, the goal was equally clear. Create reasonable doubt, show that Karmelo acted out of fear, and persuade jurors that the law supported a self-defense claim. From opening statements onward, both sides presented dramatically different interpretations of the same event. The prosecution emphasized Austin's lack of a weapon, his age, and the fact that a disagreement under a tent ended in a fatal stab wound. The defense emphasized the confrontation itself, the physical contact, and Karmelo's perception of danger in those critical seconds. The jury's task would ultimately come down to one question: which version of events was more credible? And over the days that followed, they would hear testimony designed to answer exactly that. As the trial continued, jurors were asked to focus on what happened in those critical seconds under the tent. Not what people thought happened, not what social media claimed happened, what the evidence showed happened. The prosecution repeatedly returned to the same central point. Austin Metcalf was unarmed. That fact mattered because prosecutors argued that no matter how heated the confrontation became, Austin did not possess a weapon. The state argued that a verbal disagreement and a physical push did not justify responding with a knife. The defense did not dispute that Karmelo Anthony stabbed Austin. Instead, they focused on why he did it. Defense attorneys argued that Karmelo feared what would happen next. They argued that the physical confrontation caused him to believe he needed to protect himself. Throughout the trial, jurors were asked to place themselves in that moment. A crowded tent, a confrontation, raised emotions, a physical encounter, and a decision made in seconds. The prosecution argued those seconds contained a criminal act. The defense argued that those seconds contained self-preservation. The jury will ultimately decide which interpretation was supported by the evidence. Defense attorneys argue that self-defense cases are not judged with perfect hindsight. People do not have hours to analyze a situation while it is unfolding. They have seconds. The defense argued that Karmelo perceived a threat. They said that he was confronted physically and that his actions were driven by fear. The defense reminded jurors that the burden belonged to the state. It was not Karmelo's responsibility to prove self-defense. It was the state's responsibility to prove beyond a reasonable doubt that self-defense did not apply. That distinction became central to their argument. If jurors had reasonable doubt, the defense argued they had a legal obligation to acquit, and so the case went to the jury. After weeks of testimony, evidence, arguments, and emotional moments inside the courtroom, 12 jurors were tasked with making a decision. The responsibility was enormous. No verdict could bring Austin back. No verdict could erase what happened under the tent. But the verdict would determine whether Karmelo Anthony would spend decades in prison. Jurors reviewed the evidence. They discussed witness testimony. They debated the legal standards they had been instructed to apply. And eventually, they reached unanimous decision. The jury rejected the self-defense claim. They found Karmelo Anthony guilty of murder. For Austin's family, the verdict represented accountability. For Karmelo Anthony's family, it marked the beginning of a different tragedy. Two families sat in the same courtroom experiencing completely different emotions. Relief, pain, grief, shock, all existing at the same time. If the verdict was emotional, the sentencing hearing was even more difficult, because this was the moment family members finally had the opportunity to speak directly about what Austin's death had done to their lives. Victim impact statements are often some of the most powerful moments in any criminal case. They move beyond legal arguments, beyond evidence, beyond jury instructions, and focus on human loss. The people left behind explain what life looks like after tragedy. And in this case, those statements were devastating. Austin's family spoke about the future that had been taken from him, the milestones he would never reach, the opportunities he would never have, the memories that would never be made. One by one, family members described the emptiness left behind by Austin's death, and there was no way to listen without feeling the weight of that loss. Then came one of the most heartbreaking moments of the entire case: Austin's twin brother, Hunter Metcalf. Few relationships are as unique as the relationship between twins. From childhood onward, they experienced life together, shared memories, shared milestones, shared dreams, and now Hunter was standing in court without Austin, speaking in a room where his brother's absence was impossible to ignore. Hunter described the impact Austin's death had on him and his family. He spoke about what had been lost, about the future that would never happen, about the reality of moving forward without his twin. "You took a son, a brother, a friend, my best friend from this world." One of the statements that drew widespread attention came when Hunter told Karmelo, "You let the devil take over in that moment. Eventually, your name will be forgotten, but my brother's memory will live on." That statement wasn't about revenge. It was about legacy. Because while criminal cases often focus on defendants, Hunter wanted people to remember Austin, not the person who took his life, but the person whose life was taken. And that distinction matters, because Austin Metcalf's story should never be reduced to the circumstances of his death. He was a teenager with a future, a son, a brother, a friend, and those who loved him wanted him remembered for far more than a courtroom case. Then Austin's father addressed the court, and unlike the legal arguments that have filled the courtroom for days, there was no debate in his words, only loss. Jeff Metcalf spoke about the son he loved and the future that had been stolen. The graduations he would never attend, the milestones he would never witness, the life experiences he would never get to share with Austin. He spoke directly about the pain of losing a child, a pain that no parent ever expects to experience. Throughout the trial, Jeff had maintained a visible presence. He had sat through testimony, listened to evidence, watched witnesses describe the final moments of his son's life. Now he had the opportunity to tell the court what those moments had cost his family. I truly believe you had a great career ahead of you, and your intensity on the field showed the leader you were. The saddest part is we don't get to see you achieve all your goals. We were robbed. My son's death didn't just break my heart, it broke my nervous system. People will think grief is sadness. It's not. It's rage. Pure, unfiltered rage. Looking directly at Anthony, he said, "You failed your parents. You failed yourself. And you failed society. You don't belong in this community. You can't even look me in the eye right now, but you can stab my effing son in the heart." And as he spoke, the reality of the case became impossible to ignore. This wasn't simply a criminal prosecution. This was a father mourning a son he would never get back. Then came one of the most powerful statements of the entire sentencing hearing. Austin's mother, Megan Metcalf. She addressed Karmelo Anthony directly. Her words would quickly spread across the country. She told him, "You should feel lucky because I've been sentenced to a lifetime without my son." The courtroom fell silent because in a single sentence, she expressed something every parent fears. Prison sentences end. A mother's grief does not. 35 years can be measured. A lifetime without your child cannot. Her statement wasn't about punishment. It was about loss. The kind of loss that follows a parent every day for the rest of their life. But the sentencing hearing also included another perspective, one that reminded everyone in the courtroom that tragedy had touched more than one family. Before sentencing, Karmelo Anthony's mother addressed the court. She spoke about her son, about the child she had raised, and about the reality that regardless of what happened next, her family had also been changed forever. She asked the court to consider who Karmelo was beyond the worst decision of his life. She described him as more than the person jurors had heard about during the trial, more than the defendant seated at the defense table. As she spoke, the courtroom was confronted with a difficult reality. Two mothers were grieving, one because her son was dead, the other because her son was about to spend decades in prison. The circumstances were very different. The losses were very different. But both families were facing futures they never imagined. It was a reminder that while the trial had produced a verdict, it had not produced healing, and it had not restored what was lost. Nothing could do that. Ultimately, the judge sentenced Karmelo Anthony to 35 years in prison. For some, the sentence felt appropriate, but for others, it felt too severe. And for some, it felt insufficient. That is often the reality of cases involving young defendants and young victims. There is rarely universal agreement, but one fact remained unchanged. Austin Metcalf was gone. No sentence could alter that. No court ruling could reverse it. No appeal could erase what happened. The criminal justice system could only address accountability. It could never restore what was lost. Long after the trial ended, the effects of this case continued. Austin's family continued learning how to live with grief. His friends continued navigating life without him. His school community continued carrying the memory of what happened. For many people in Frisco, the case became a reminder how quickly lives can change. One ordinary school event, one confrontation, one decision, and multiple families forever altered. The community would continue discussing the verdict, the sentence, the evidence, the legal arguments. But for those closest to Austin, the discussion was never really about those things. It was about him, the person, the life, the future, the absence. The death of Austin Metcalf is ultimately a story about loss, not headlines, not politics, not internet debates. Loss. A family lost a son. A brother lost his twin. Friends lost someone they expected to grow alongside. And regardless of where people stand on the legal arguments, that reality deserves to remain at the center of the conversation. Because Austin Metcalf was more than the final moments of his life. He was 17 years old. He had plans, dreams, goals, people who loved him. And those people now carry the responsibility of remembering him. This is why we tell these stories, not to sensationalize tragedy, not to turn loss into entertainment, but to remember the people at the center of these cases and understand how a single moment can change countless lives forever. If you want updates as cases like this evolve or when new videos go live, I've linked my email list below. I only send emails when there's new information or meaningful context to share. Subscribe to stay informed and feel free to share your thoughts respectfully in the comments. What part of this story stayed with you? And if you want to support the channel, you can use the super thanks button below. It genuinely helps support the time and research behind these videos. This is Between Headlines TV. I'll see you in the next one.